Well, this Monday, Twitter released its first ever transparency report, and it revealed that just in the first 6 months of 2012, they've received more demands from governments for user data than they did all of last year. And surprise, surprise, the United States made up the majority of those 849 requests with a whopping 679, a far second with Japan with 98 requests. Now, Twitter also revealed that it's complied with 75% of user data demands that have been requested by U.S. authorities. Now, to add to that, a New York judge just this week ordered Twitter to hand over tweets and account information for Malcolm Harris. He's an occupier who was arrested on the Brooklyn Bridge last year, and he's also been a guest on this program. So all of this is just more evidence of a growing surveillance state, where governments want to get their hands on as much of your information and communications as they can. And usually, this is all in the name of fighting terrorism, fighting crime. But what's at risk here is your privacy. So, do we just accept it as inevitable? Do we resign? Do we give all that information up? Or is there still a way to fight Big Brother? Joining me to discuss this is Glenn Greenwald, Salon columnist and author of the book With Liberty and Justice for Some, How the Law is Used to Destroy Equality and Protect the Powerful. All right, Glenn, thanks for joining us tonight. And let me think of where we start. I mean, if you ask me, it's pretty undeniable these days that we really do live in a surveillance state. But as you mentioned before, a lot of people out there will come at it with the attitude or with the argument that if they have nothing to hide, then what do they really care that that information is being monitored? So how do you counter something like that? How do you tell people that that's not the right way to look at it?
First of all, there's zero question that we live in a surveillance state, no matter how one understands that term. And I think it's important to answer your question to emphasize just how extensive it is. According to the Washington Post in its 2010 Top Secret America series, the National Security Agency collects 1.7 billion emails and telephone calls and stores them every single day. That's every day, 1.7 billion emails and telephone calls. William Binney, who is a longtime official in the National Security Agency and resigned in protest of its focus on domestic spying after 9/11, recently said in an interview that the NSA has stored 20 trillion transactions, communication transactions, between and among Americans. So there really is virtually no communication that exists any longer between Americans electronically or telephonically that's beyond the reach of the NSA. And all you have to do is look at the history of how surveillance states have used the information that they gather to control their citizenry, to blackmail them, to suppress all forms of dissent in the Iron Curtain. That was the mode of choice. And in America, we have our own history with the FBI running wild with surveillance and punishing dissidents. And that's the danger that we face.
But so back to my original question, right, is that people are going to say that that's no big deal. I don't really have anything to hide, so go ahead, monitor away, look at my emails, whatever you want. I'm not a criminal, but I think that your privacy is still important. So how do you make that clear to them?
Well, first of all, people who do say that, I don't think really mean it. And one way that you can prove to them that they don't mean it is to ask them whether or not they would give you all of their passwords to all of their social networking accounts and emails so that you can monitor everything and read everything that they're saying, whether or not you would allow them to, they would allow you to put a device on their telephone to listen to their telephone conversations and put a television camera in their bedroom and in their bathroom and in their home and in their office to monitor everything that they're doing and record everything that they're doing. Most people would react as though that were a repellent request, because intuitively we understand that privacy is very important. And I think the real reason that privacy is important, and your question suggests that it's a hard value to articulate, and it is, but I think that the real reason why people intuitively know that privacy is so crucial is because it's only when we are able to do things without external judgment being cast upon us, without external eyes watching, are we able to experiment with new forms of thought and behavior, to explore the realms of dissent, to question and challenge orthodoxy. It's only when we don't fear that people will be judging us and condemning us are we really free to do things beyond just what conformity requires. It's really the area in which dissent and creativity and exploration reside. And when you take away privacy, both at a state and societal level or at an individual level, what you're really doing is destroying that crucial human opportunity ability to be able to, on one's own, away from the prying eyes of others, decide for oneself what one is, who one wants to be, what one wants to think about, and you really subject yourself to this monitoring that forces you into a box of conformity, and it's destructive on the societal level and on the individual level as well.
So how do we look at the fact that the government often uses that exact same argument, you could say, as the individual does, right? Is that if they want to develop new technologies, if they want to make certain breakthroughs maybe in diplomacy, if the CIA needs to go out there and do something abroad, then it has to be done with a veil of secrecy over it. It's for our national security purposes. They'll say it's to keep you safe. So, you know, they these days act like they're us, right?
Right. Well, one of the crucial things to emphasize is that the way that government is supposed to work, and you look at political science theory, or you look at what the American founders said, it's supposed to be the exact reverse of the way we have it. So government, people in power, we're supposed to act with complete transparency. We are always supposed to see what it is that they're doing, except in very rare cases. And the individual is supposed to be able to live our lives surrounded by a wall of privacy, without people knowing what we're doing, unless there's evidence that we're committing a crime. And what we've done is completely reverse that. So while the government knows everything about what we're doing and what we're saying, we know virtually nothing about what they're saying. And it's this imbalance, this power imbalance, that is really so dangerous. That's the framework, the dynamic, which every totalitarian state uses to control the population and protect their own power. And this national security excuse is something that I think everybody realizes is a pretext. If you go back and look at what the Nixon administration said, what anyone who has ever abused secrecy power has always said, it's always been this idea, well, don't worry, trust us, because we are only doing this for your own good. And all the evidence shows that whenever human beings are able to spy on other people and eavesdrop on them in the dark, in secrecy, with no one watching over their shoulder, no oversight, inevitably, not usually or probably, but inevitably, that power is severely abused. And that's what happened in every single case where we've been able to discover what was being done.
Do you think that, with the internet, we're in a bit of a catch-22, because on one hand, it's made it so much easier for people to communicate, to get social movements going, right, to access certain information, but then because of that, because of our dependence on the internet, then the government is taking advantage of it. But, is it an inevitable thing that they will try to control and monitor all of that? Or could perhaps some of the private companies, the Googles, the Facebooks out there, really not collude with the government so much and stand up for us and, and counter that?
Yeah, it's a great question. To me, that's one of the primary questions, the two or three most important questions that we face. The internet is this force for great good that promises to democratize societies, to enable mass movements, to be able to join together, to communicate with one another. We saw this in the Arab Spring, and yet at the same time, it is true. And you asked, is it inevitable that governments will try and monitor and control it? Of course it's inevitable that they'll try. Every power faction in history that has been threatened by a new technology, which is what the internet is, has sought to control or diffuse it. And so the question then becomes, well, how can those efforts be defeated? And I think that there are some encouraging signs from some technology companies. Twitter in particular is quite good at objecting and trying to protect the privacy of their users. Google has some good and some bad cases where they have done both sides. But I think more interestingly, there are efforts underway to develop technology to shield the internet from governments and intelligence agencies, ways to put a shield of anonymity over what you do on the internet, things like the Tor project, and then other projects designed to basically send internet communications multiple times around the world so that no governments like China or Iran that want to censor the internet can do so with this technology because they don't know where it's originating, and no countries, whether it be the United States or others, that want to monitor the internet would be able to do so either. This is the real battle between these kind of efforts to create anonymity on the internet and governments that want to stay a step ahead. That is a really important war being waged in terms of whether the internet will be a weapon for good or for bad.
Yeah, and a battle it is, right? Like you said, there are some of these tools out there that you can use, but they take a lot of work in order to find them. Now, the last thing that I want to talk about is we do a lot of media critique here on this program. And if you ask me, it's often frustrating because if you look at the mainstream media, the cable networks especially, they seem pretty apathetic about this stuff. At times, they'll even veer into what kind of sounds like mockery, especially if you want to look at the relationship that they have with WikiLeaks, the way that they approach WikiLeaks and Julian Assange. But are we sometimes too hard on them? You know, I mean, is it such a thing where they just are completely subservient to establishment, or is there maybe an element of fear there too? I mean, if you're on TV, then everything you're doing is being recorded and monitored, right? So, you know, does that play into their type of coverage at all?
Well, certainly there's a great deal of cowardice that drives the establishment media, but I don't think that's much of an excuse in the sense that if you go into journalism, you're really undertaking the duty to be adversarial to those in power. That's what journalism is intended to do. That's why there's a First Amendment that guarantees a free press. You know, I used to be someone who thought that by critiquing the establishment media, by pressuring them and coercing them, by shaming them, that you could actually change their behavior in a significant way. I think you can change their behavior in isolated cases, but what's important to understand is the established media by its very nature is owned by large corporations that have extremely close relationships with the government. They're people whose careers depend upon gaining access into and leaks from and other favors from people who are in government power. The nature of the institution is designed to basically be a mouthpiece for the royal court. You can't wait around hoping that they're going to change their colors. It's endemic to what they are, and so I think the much better alternative is to do what you're doing, what lots of other people are doing, which is using technology to create alternatives to compete with them. And the power of the internet, the power of multiple cable channels and the like means that they no longer monopolize our discourse, and there's lots of other places that people can go and now do go to get alternative perspectives and viewpoints and real adversarial journalism. And I think it's that competition that is a much more effective antidote to solving this problem than sitting around hoping that this leopard is going to change its spots. It never will.
Yeah, definitely something we need more of, right, is to actively counter it. Glenn, thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having me.
All right, well, it's time to take our first break, but sit tight. We have another special guest for you tonight. Capitalism is the hand that feeds, but you might want to bite it before it strangles you. Chris Hedges is going to explain why. It's the subject of his new book, Days of Destruction, Days of Revolt. That's next.